Beauty can be light, loving and protective, yet beauty can also be dark, scary and malicious. So enjoy this week's case analysis with me, Dr. Fiona Gerken. I specialise in dark personalities of women and the tactics they use to get what they want. This is a story of identity fraud, intertwined with personal pathology and a flair for the dramatic. Today we're talking about Anna Sorokin. She was also known as Anna Delvey. She would often switch between names as part of her ruse and fraud. Anna was born in Russia and grew up in a middle-class family in Germany. They didn't have a lot of money, but when she moved to New York, she posed as a wealthy socialite, infiltrating New York's elite. She claimed to be a German heiress with a large trust fund. Anna didn't just tell lies, she embodied them. She crafted a persona so convincing that she managed to navigate the inner sanctums of high society with apparent ease. What set Anna apart wasn't just her ability to fabricate stories, but it was her extravagant spending. And most of the time that meant other people had to pay. She manipulated strategic relationships for status and financial gain, forging connections with influential people and leveraging those relationships to her advantage. I think the worst part of this story is that she betrayed close friends, often with no remorse whatsoever. Anna was eventually charged with fraud, and it was found that between 2013 and 2017, she conned banks, hotels, friends and other service providers out of approximately $275,000. And she did this by forging documents and using her social charm to convince people that she had money but that she just couldn't access it. She proposed launching an exclusive arts club which was financed by a fake $22 million loan. She stayed in a hotel for over a month, charging spa treatments, meals and room costs to the room, stating that her family's European bank account was having issue with the wire transfer. And she did this through providing the hotel with fake documents. It's believed that her bill was about $30,000 in the end, and when they did eventually pressure her to pay the bill, she fled from the hotel. A second one of her cons was when she convinced 3 of her friends to go on a 5-day lavish trip with her. She paid for the flights and most of the expenses up front, but when it came to the $62,000 bill at the hotel, suddenly Anna had forgotten her card and Rachel, her friend, had to pay the $62,000 bill with her own credit card, under the assurance that Anna would pay her back. However, Anna never did, and it was this case that actually led to Anna being arrested. Another scam was where she convinced a bank that she was a wealthy heiress using fake documents and fake tax returns and managed to get $100,000 out of the bank before they conducted an audit and found that the documents she'd provided were actually fake. At this time, she'd already withdrawn $22,000 from the bank out of that loan. So these are just the main things that Anna did that she eventually was charged with for fraud, but they're pretty serious. So let's have a look at the legal outcome that came from this. In 2019, Anna was convicted of multiple counts of grand larceny, theft of services, and sentenced to 4 to 12 years in prison, along with fines and restitution. Her fines were $24,000 and restitution was $199,000. Let's talk briefly about Anna's behaviour. So one of the main things she did was use a false identity as Anna Delvey, the wealthy German heiress. And this was a way to get financial advantages, which she did as a result of claiming she was an heiress. She exploited the trust of people and systems and used forged documents to get money and services. She manipulated friends and acquaintances, convincing them to cover her expenses, claiming she would pay them back once she got access to her funds in Germany. She also denied wrongdoing and showed little remorse for her behaviour. She claimed that what she did was entrepreneurial ambition and that she was unfairly blamed by the public for what she did, and that the public perception was created through the media and that was the reason she was not respected for what she had done. This shows a real false narrative in terms of her understanding of what she did and how she hurt others. So she clearly had no remorse for her behaviour or any ability to self-reflect. Additionally, Anna was also willing to accept $320,000 for her life rights so that Netflix could produce the show called Inventing Anna, which she did use to pay some of the restitution and fines, but it does raise some ethical concerns around rewarding a convicted fraudster while her victims endured financial and emotional harm. My only hope is that that money did go to pay those people back that she did take money from. As you know, in this podcast, we don't go into a great detail about the case. I really just like to touch on some of those behaviours and how they affect others. So let's talk about the impact before we get on to the dark tetrad traits and how possibly Anna fitted into some of those as to why she had no remorse for her behaviour. So 4 key impacts that Anna had on others. Firstly was that financial and emotional betrayal of friends, especially Rachel, who lost $62,000 for the vocation she thought was going to be paid for by Anna. The second thing was the financial loss for businesses and institutions, so banks and hotels and service providers who gave her things without payment, assuming she would be able to pay later, given she claimed to have money that was tied up through wire transfer. Thirdly, it was the erosion of trust in social circles, and this seemed to be a real key thing amongst the elites in New York. Apparently, after Anna had pulled her scams, the socialites in New York found it much harder to trust people that came on board as self-presenting personas, as being someone who was rich and wealthy and part of the elites. But people were a little bit more sceptical after Anna had managed to infiltrate high society for so long. The fourth impact were the ethical issues around her being given money for the show Inventing Anna on Netflix. You know, I think in that show they did really romanticise Anna's ability to manipulate the situation. Often true crime can do that. Given, nobody was physically hurt, I think sometimes people can think, especially from a woman, that it's, wow, this woman's managed to infiltrate high society and these people had money anyway, so it doesn't matter. But I certainly think it does matter, and the fact that she had no remorse is a real problem. Because although these crimes were between 2013 and 2017, it was a 4-year period, I suspect that there's been fraudulent behaviour long before that. This is not something someone starts doing out of the blue. Usually they have done this kind of behaviour for some time and been rewarded for it, whether it's through praise or through getting things that they didn't have before. So I suspect this was not the start of Anna's behaviour, because these were some pretty big scams. I imagine it was something she'd been doing for some time and potentially overseas before she moved to New York. Now let's talk about the dark tetrad traits and how Anna embodied some of these. So we're going to start with narcissism first. Now that's the personality trait that allows someone to feel a sense of entitlement, and it's all about me kind of situation. And you saw that in the fact that she had a real lack of remorse. She was very much driven by image and status and wanting that attention and admiration, and that was definitely Anna. She felt that she was entitled to that luxurious lifestyle and used those relationships and status for her own financial gain. She desired to control the narrative and her public image, and when she was seen as a criminal, she blamed the public image for that and not her own behaviour. She really had a sense of self-importance to think that she could be part of the high-level elites in New York, even though she didn't really have any money to her name. When we're looking at Machiavellian traits, this is where someone is manipulative and quite strategic. She was quite strategic and deceptive and manipulative, and these are all elements of a Machiavellian personality and Machiavellian traits. She certainly planned and maintained her deception and appealing status. She was quite calculated in what she did, and she was strategic in who she formed her social bonds with. She knew that by forming social bonds with high society, that they would never believe that someone who had no money and wasn't part of that group would manipulate them and pretend to have money when they didn't. So she certainly did that, and she certainly manipulated the media for sympathy and self-promotion as part of her con after all this happened, as well as during the time when she was committing the fraud. Under the psychopathic traits, which are very closely aligned with Machiavellianism, she was very callous and she certainly had no remorse for her behaviour. That was certainly something that came out in the court case. And that's something we often do see in people that are psychopathic. She was very cold and didn't care about lying about who she was, and was quite proud of her deceptive acts in many ways. And she certainly disregarded the losses of her victims without much care for how it affected them. It's been reported that she was quite unapologetic about how she portrayed others, and she deflected her guilt and blamed external factors such as the media rather than looking at her own behaviour. So the fourth trait in the dark tetrad is sadism. Now, look, it's hard to determine whether Anna in any way was sadistic. I'm probably not inclined to think so. I think there are sadistic traits as part of psychopathy, which, certainly probably are closer aligned with her behaviour. Sadism is where you gain pleasure from the suffering of others. And look, the fact that others suffered as a result of her behaviour and that she didn't seem to care about that, I suppose, in some way does suggest that she was showing some sadistic traits. She possibly enjoyed the influence she had, but wasn't focused so much on the cruelty for cruelty's sake. The story of Anna is a very interesting one, and it causes quite a lot of controversy, given that she managed to scam money from high society to get free stuff. And that she scammed businesses and banks, and a lot of people think, oh, well, they're institutions, they don't matter. But she did also scam individuals, and I suspect if she wasn't found out, this behaviour would have continued. I also don't think this is where the behaviour started. These kind of people display this behaviour long before they're often found out. So I suspect there was low-level fraud that she was not charged with prior to this happening, and this was potentially something that maybe have occurred in Germany. Look, I really hope that Anna has learnt from her behaviour and that she's learnt from the fraudulent behaviour that this is not how we treat others. Unfortunately, from all my reading of her case, there appears to be a real lack of remorse for her own behaviour and a real lack of ability to self-reflect and caring more about her image than she did about deceiving others. However, I pray that she finds peace in her life and that eventually she is able to find a way to enjoy life without taking advantage of others. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode on Anna, and I hope you're enjoying the series on Dark Beauty. There's some really interesting cases out there on women who have committed fraud and who fit onto those dark tetrad traits. And I think it's interesting to just sort of have a brief look at some of those without great detail. Maybe in the future I will do a series on particular women who show all traits in the dark tetrad pool, and that maybe I will look at how we tease that out and see the lead up to that. There's some really interesting cases out there that we can look at. But thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, especially if you're on YouTube. And please feel free, if you are on YouTube, to leave a comment. Don't forget to follow me on social media. I'm on X and Instagram with the handle @Dr. Fiona Gherkin. Until next time, thank you for joining me.